Tapi jawab, imiwan.
Pastinya jemaahnya selihat rajani fitbah. Nata nasiran, wanma kimau nana beluganis.
وخسر يدعو تسويق
Harnaba junkyard. Nisu beduni ta'awah lubahnya.
حولها توقيت المشعل إلى الروض.
Pastinya jemaahnya selihat rajani fitbah. Nata nasiran, wanma kimau nana beluganis. Harnaba junkyard. Nisu beduni ta'awah lubahnya.
جواب لطيفة ونص
Hey guys, we are doing a walkthrough today of the Karnak Temple in Luxor, ancient city of Thebes. And this temple is arguably the largest temple on the planet other than Angkor Wat in Cambodia, but regardless, it was always revered as one of the largest in the world. So this temple dates back to the beginning of the Middle Kingdom, but we are going to find evidence of the Old Kingdom, or what looks like Old Kingdom, and even further way back, even before that. So to get this straight, the official records and writings date the site's construction to the Middle Kingdom and continuing on through Dynastic Egypt's history, and finally deserted around 336 CE when the Roman Empire closed down all pagan sites. The idea is that this site's foundation and megalithic structures were originally from a pre-existing culture that I always refer to as ancient civilization times 2. And other people just explain it usually as lost ancient civilizations or advanced ancient civilizations, so on and so forth. But most of the construction, monuments, and some of the statues on the surface are from dynastic pharaonic times. So as we move along, we will see mostly dynastic Egypt's creations, and scattered amongst the ruins we will see the foundations and construction of what we believe was indeed by this ancient civilization times 2. So keep that in mind as we do our walkthrough today. So right now we are on the alley or avenue of ram sphinxes that lead into the temple. And there are many rows or avenues of sphinxes all over this site that were moved and then put in different spots, as well as the sphinxes that ran from this temple, Karnak, to Luxor Temple. And these sphinxes have statues of the pharaoh in between each of the paws. And as I mentioned, they are ram-headed. And this is a very big significance in what I believe is a very big part of this area, being later additions added to this temple, dedicated to the god Amun, and his union later on with the sun god Ra, becoming Amun Ra. And as I mentioned in other videos, even though we're here visually to see the foundations of a very ancient civilization's times 2 presence, my personal form of study in this is of the ancient gods of the ancient world. That propels me to get to these places. And it is they who would have been the builders, or at least gave knowledge to builders of these very ancient structures. And I also believe the gods of the ancient world were alive and did rule Earth at one point in time, and I believe the god Amun resided and was an actual living being here at this temple, in the area known as the Middle Kingdom Court, the oldest part of the temple. However, we do believe that this so-called Middle Kingdom Court area, which you will see in a bit, is much, much older. And I believe it was the god Amun's place, and he resided and or frequented this temple during a period we know as the time of Zep-Tepi, the time before the axis of the earth tilted, a time before the great catastrophic event around 12,000 years ago. So I'm not going to go into the gods in the ancient world and all their cross-cultural shenanigans. That's for another video. So we're here in the court area through the main entrance, just past the first pylon, and we can see here that this is the remains of a mud brick ramp that was used for the construction of this first pylon. However, it was never completed. So different parts and sections of this temple were continually being added onto, and this was a very late addition in the history of this temple. And then this area is pretty cool because we can see how Dynastic Egyptians built some of their columns. So here is an example of the theory of why we think Dynastic Pharaonic Egyptians did not build a lot of their gigantic monuments and structures because of evidence like this. Granite is hard. It's a hard rock to cut with copper and bronze tools. And these columns are not granite. But sandstone and limestone of different grades are more easily workable, as seen here in this column building technique. Remember, this was a late addition, so the techniques, you would think, would be that much better than the previous. So you can see how it's made up of different circular pieces, and then after those different pieces are stacked on top of each other, then the carving begins to smooth it out and become a column. And if you look at the other columns next to it, you can see the rows of the individual pieces. Don't get me wrong, they were master craftsmen on every level, and you cannot take anything away from the dynastic Egyptians. But we're not talking about granite, which we do see other columns around Egypt that were made perfectly, granite pillars, smooth on each side. This is a very big block called white calcite crystal, and this monstrous block is near the entrance as well. And we do find some power tool marks on here that Joseph is going to be explaining in a few seconds. And Joseph is part of the Kemet school, and he is a specialist in rock cutting. He's a sculptor himself and a rock carver himself, and has many years under his belt, as well as the Egyptology, and also his father, Hakim, which I'm going to leave in the description, and you can check all that out. But let's give Joseph a listen.
Look here. You find some power tool marks. You see it?
Yeah.
So we lost Joseph's audio, but what he's explaining here is that the markings would more or less be from a power tool marking rather than a chisel or a copper and bronze tool. And we see a lot of this evidence. We're going to see it here later on in some more detailed work. So as we move along, we are going to the Hypostyle Hall here, and this was for sure a highlight of this temple. And it's not anything that we would consider non-dynastic Pharaonic. It was definitely the production of the dynastic Egyptians. It was built around the 19th dynasty, so not too ancient, but still magnificent. And as I mentioned in all my videos, you can't take anything away from the dynastic Pharaonic Egyptians. They built tremendous things because they had the financial backing to pay their craftsmen and had only but time. The ancient world, including Rome, were wealthy and had time, lots of time, to create magnificent work. They took a lot of pride in it, and it was pretty much one of the main things to do. So the ancient world, remember, had the cash flow, and we see that here. So this Hypostyle Hall has 134 gigantic columns, and the 12 in the center are even more gigantic. So the official record here is that Amenhotep III started the construction here, and of course it was added on to as years went on, and complete by Seti I. And then Ramses II added his mark to this place, and of course overcarved or recarved into his father's reliefs with his own crude relief carving. So Ramses the Great, Ramses II, did this a lot, and he was never going to be forgotten. Now we have reached the area with the remaining obelisks by Tutmosis I and Queen Hatshepsut. And this area is recorded as Middle Kingdom, but we think it dates back much farther. This is my complete favorite area of this temple. So this area we believe is built upon an older structure and foundation that lies underneath. Now, you might take notice of the nice paved stones that you see there, but you can see that this block of granite here, and the way it is shaped and the way that it looks, that is reminiscent of Old Kingdom for sure, in this Middle Kingdom court area. Now the debate of some scholars in the academic world is that this section in this temple may be Old Kingdom, so some do maybe think it goes back to the Old Kingdom, and this is what we suggest. But here's the kicker: when we think of Old Kingdom construction, again now the ancient lost civilizations theorists, When we think of Old Kingdom construction, like the pyramids, the Valley Temple in Giza, we are thinking of Old Kingdom construction in actuality being built and constructed by this ancient civilization times 2. Here is the obelisk of Hatshepsut, and this is the largest one here at 350 to 400 tons. Single piece of granite, people. We think obelisks were a form of energy transmission and being resonators, and the fact that they absolutely needed to be cut from a single piece of granite. And of course that would have been to maintain resonance, and a non-interrupted flow of energy in resonance can only be manifested through a single or solid piece, and in this case granite. And here is the obelisk sitting on the base. The angle is not good, but what we are looking at here is how perfectly aligned on its base it is. And it's almost impossible to put it in place that perfect, where it's equal distance on all sides. We got some nice paved floor again, but looky. What's that? Oh, it's another stone that's out of place. Not because it's shaped like a pillar base, but the fact that, again, it's white calcite, which was used in the pyramid structures and the complex around Giza. So we're standing in New Kingdom time period, and here everything else around us is made of sandstone. Here's a different one, but look how sunken and how things are built around it. It's basically was being respected as the newer builders were coming in.
Lucien, you can feel the ridges if you put your hand in there.
Yeah, absolutely. You feel like
The ridges, the thing just biting into it.
wow. That's awesome.
Check that out. That is a tubular drill hole that we just heard Rolando telling me to feel the ridges left by the power tool or the drill mark, and they were definitely in there. And we see this in other areas in Egypt, and some people might say, wait a minute, maybe this is the work of someone in recent times that used a normal power tool to make this. And the answer to that is, in Egypt, we can easily be arrested for tampering or moving an object, or you can get thrown out of a site even if you're trespassing on a section that is forbidden to the general public. We see a lot of those areas, but everything is guarded and, more importantly, protected by the Egyptian government and the Egyptian antiquities, which is a good thing. But the idea is that these are so protected, and you can't even get in to excavate these areas. And other countries have been doing this for a long period of time, and just the amount of permission that they need to get in. So pretty much what you see is what has been here for a very long time. So tubular drill marks, we're going to see a lot more of this later. So this is pretty crazy. Anyone who has visited the Valley Temple, and I urge you, after this video, to Google the images of the Valley Temple in Giza, and you will see the exact megalithic granite walls and structures that look exactly like this. This to me is the smoking gun that this ancient structures here existed before the dynastic Pharaonic Egyptians, and they were built by the same ancient civilization times 2 that also built the Valley Temple and the pyramid complex. So there's perfect seaming, paired with the size of this. You have to acknowledge the fact that this was cut with machines. And again, you're going to see a lot more of this in a little bit. So here is another example of precision cutting amongst the other structures that are not. So look how straight and perfect these are. You can see right in there how fine. It was like cut like as if it wasn't even a hard surface. And in my Ramesseum video, I explained that the hieroglyphs that we think were definitely added on in dynastic times, and the fact that these structures were not originally intended to have hieroglyphs. So in other words, the ancient dynastic Pharaonic Egyptians applied hieroglyphs to these structures that were already existing. Okay, so you're in for a treat here. This is the largest drill mark found to date. It's another smoking gun that cannot be denied. Be in denial. Oh, get it? We're in Egypt. We got to be in denial. All right, this is the largest drill hole, and we can actually see the inside. now right there where Joseph's index finger is the evidence of how thin the blade of the tool was that cut out this granite. And there's a close-up of the overcut, or where the blade actually extended past the cut. Very thin blade. Egyptologists have their explanation that this is a copper drill or a copper tube, actually, of some sort, that dynastic Egyptians had, and was very sharp. And the combination of this circular copper tubing, spinning by hand and incorporating it with sand, along with the process, made this actual cutout, made this granite hole here. That should definitely get some people's heads scratching for sure. So here is another example of very old construction in these massive walls in this chamber. And look how large and smooth everything is. Some parts of this was dismantled and pieced back together because this was devastated at various times. So you can see where the remains of one and another would be put next to it. But for the most part, the walls that remained, how smooth and actually old. Now, just by looking at the floor, you can see that it's from a much older foundation. The older foundations are so big and solid, and you can just tell how big the slabs are as you walk on them. And you can see the difference between the older floor and the newer paved pathway there to the right of this pic. And now take a look how big these walls are. They are made up of single slabs seamed together to create a very large foundation for something massive that we're just overlooking because it's just part of this temple. But you really have to look within every nook and cranny, and you'll discover all the hidden structures that just seem to blend in, but they don't. Now we've reached the side of the temple where the 7th, 8th, and 9th 10 pylons are close by, and the sacred lake. So this is the top portion of the other Hatshepsut obelisk, and there we can see hieroglyphs that we believe were added on later by dynastic Pharaonic Egyptians. So the idea about hieroglyphs is that they were carved into already existing structures and objects and walls, and we believe the largest obelisks are from the pre-dynastic ancient civilization ×2 time frame, and the smaller, more crude, were constructed by dynastic Egyptians. So here again we see foundation of rose granite. This again is clear evidence that we are observing a very old site was built upon for thousands of years. And you can see how the sandstone structures are built right on top of the rose granite. And this over here looks like worn down steps or a notched for some apparent reason. But you can just tell again, all this stuff is completely much older.
The wall that was formed from huge slabs of white calcite crystal on a foundation of rose granite. For me, that's clearly very ancient structure, yet the writings here and here will be dating back to the New Kingdom. But we already have seen all the New Kingdom structures is from sandstone. Behind that structure over here, there is a huge area, huge acres of land, filled with broken pieces, the leftover of quarrying of granite, which shows that this site here once had megalithic structures, all made from rose granite and white calcite and quartzite.
And as you heard Yosef talking about the different types of stone, and I also included him in the description, so you can learn all about what he does. But you can see he was talking about how far back this temple dates back. We believe it's pre-flood, before the catastrophic event, about 11 to 12,000 years ago. And this theory of advanced civilization has to be pre-flood and pre-cataclysm. And this area here is the remains of the megalithic statues and where they reside, made of granite and quartzite. And these are similar to what we find at the Ramesseum and in Tanis. And if you didn't see my video of the Ramesseum, you guys definitely have to check that out, of the giant colossus of Ramses II. I go into pretty much a whole detailed thing about those colossal statues that we find there. So you can see how accurate and the way that all this is carved to precision, and as challenging as that is, just the sheer size. You add that to the equation and this becomes next to impossible with copper and later on bronze tools in ancient Egypt. Now remember, I keep saying this, that you can't take anything away from dynastic Egyptians. They had the wealth, the power, and the money to create gigantic statues. The problem here is what they used to create. That they either had the power tools and high advanced tools to create these angles and smooth lines and curved lines. Look at that, the nail, the way that it's routed out. You know, we're talking about two different things here. So that's what the question is. They either had the tools or they didn't. And if they didn't, it wasn't done by them. So again, the cuticle or the eponychium, perfect, the toes. But let's listen to a podiatrist that was with us on the trip.
That little skin.
That's the eponychium.
Yeah.
And it's perfect.
Exactly.
The other interesting thing is they cut the toenails properly, how they should be cut. 'Cause that's what I'm a podiatrist.
Oh, dude. That is awesome. Right?
But they've even got the
I know.
eponychium there.
So when you,
incredible.
I see that, I recognize that. So when you find these fine details, and then you don't find that the writings is matching, it looks good, but not that high quality.
No.
Then I'm not. Where is the tool? Where is the
Where's
result
the tool
of
that
that?
produces
And why
it?
it's not?
Yeah.
Why it's not? Look here, for example. Now we look here, we find that look, very poor. And they never reached again the same surface, the same polished surface. Look here, the pieces of flint had a clean cut. Look at that, that's a piece of flint inside the stone. Huh? There is no difference. The tool that made it took all with the same precision.
And we just heard Joseph talk about the difference between the crude carving of the hieroglyphs in this base of the statue here compared to the precise detailing of the statue itself. And a quick note regarding the base here. Look how perfect the cutting of the base and how straight that surface is. And the fact that it was not wavy or had any bumps. It's a clean, sheared cut. And the fact that the Egyptologists tell us that it was done with these primitive tools and then sanded by 50 to 100 pairs of hands. You just have to scratch your head. And if anybody has ever done any painting to a wall that's made out of sheetrock, this is what this feels like. Sheetrock. It's that smooth. So here's some more leftover pieces, as we see all over this temple, especially back in these parts here. So you can see some more of the big pieces of granite and the fact that there was so much more here than we can imagine that was quarried away. And also you can see here another look at the foundation, and probably a foundation that was in place for more than 10,000 years.
Made of quartz diorite. Quartz diorite is the material that they made the pounders of to recycle the granite. So what did they do that with? You know that material, that the green pounders that we find, the quartz diorite?
Guys, listen to what he just said. The pounders of the quartz diorite is what we see here in this picture that I took at Aswan. That's what Yosef was just talking about. In Aswan, they explain that to extract the granite right from the earth, they use these pounders and a combination of other methods. And these pounders are what is used to crush granite to shape it. Now, the point is, this statue that we're talking about, that Joseph was just talking about, is made out of this same material. So if this is what the ancient Egyptians used to crush, pound granite, then how did they make this statue?
They used it to, the official story that says that they used it to crush the granite to extract it, as we're gonna hear about it in the unfinished obelisk site. So that whole statue was once made from quartz diorite, and it used to be huge as well. So that material is actually harder than granite and than quartzite.
Earlier in this video, I was mentioning on how some of the walls and large granite blocks are identical of what we see at the Valley Temple in Giza. And my head almost exploded as I walked up to these, because there is no way that anybody can tell me that the builders of the Valley Temple are not the same builders that made this right here. This wall is dated to New Kingdom as the writings on it, and it's very hard to believe that it belongs to the New Kingdom when we see these other structures around Egypt that are identical. So here's the Valley Temple pics that I took when we were there, and if you look at the design, it's clearly the same style, building technique as we would determine as Old Kingdom. And as I mentioned earlier, we believe, and I believe, Old Kingdom construction was really the work of a much earlier time. Now look at the difference in the work that we see here. The precise perfect lines in the rectangular cutout, and then we see it dug out crudely on the bottom layer. So you can see that the purpose of these cuts in these cubby type of cutout areas here were done with greater purpose than what the Dynastic Egyptians ended up using it for. So you can see anything that was pre-existing that had a greater purpose was used for a much inferior purpose. And you can see here just what a wasteland. And man, if we can actually see all the pieces in place, I think we would have a full understanding of our ancient past.
The junkyard of Karnak.
And Sherry was reiterating the fact that we were told this is the junkyard of Karnak, which looks like, because it's housing so much of the remains over the thousands of years. So here you can see construction built in front of earlier walls. Now, you can see how the hieroglyphs are going underneath, or they're behind that wall. And of course, this is built by the Dynastic Egyptians, but I'm just bringing the point here up that this temple has been constantly built upon and built in front of other structures and on top of other structures. It's crazy.
Here we can see, I get the name, but these are bases of pillars from white calcite. That means the pillars were made from white calcite, and there used to be entire structures here from white calcite crystal. Inside the pylons, the German archaeologists, and they are German that's working here, they found pieces that was dismantled and reconstructed in some of the parts, and then they dismantled it again from inside the pylons and rebuilt it inside the open air museum. Chapels made from entire white calcite, and some of them used to be from one piece except for the ceiling. Like the whole chamber is one piece and the ceiling was another piece.
So again, the reason why we keep coming back to these types of stone that was used around this temple is because this is how we can tell what time frame the structures using these stone materials would have been built. So white calcite, granite, basalt, quartzite, diorite, fine limestone were all here in Karnak's ancient megalithic structures. And the point is that these were the chosen combinations of stone that was used here and what was used in the pyramid complex and in the surrounding area in Giza. So nothing here is dated to Old Kingdom, my friends, and yet we find the same combination of stone being used. And that special combination of stone is what I believe was used for resonance and energy transmission, as well as water, just like the pyramid complex, which you will see in another video. We didn't even go into how water was used by this ancient civilization ×2, and again, that's for a different video. So without sounding like a broken record, if Old Kingdom gave us the pyramids and the most prolific building time period in Egypt, and we see this here, then the connection cannot be ignored. And even if this was Old Kingdom builders, I believe the Old Kingdom builders should be dated much, much farther back in time. So in the nutshell, the dating of the ancient Egyptian timeline needs to be drastically altered.
But do we find any reflection of power tools? Those who know about power tools, they may come close and look and see. Usually we will find the signs of power tools around the edges. So when we look here inside the edges, you don't find the same surface like here. You can find it nicely done here in that open space. But when you get to these corners, for example, you will find that the granite is coming up. Only the power tool, like what we saw in the Egyptian museum, will go in some cases deeper than supposed to because it's cutting. Or like what you saw, for example, in Bolivia. If any one of you went to Bolivia and saw these designs inside the stone, it was also made by power tool.
If you guys got to check out my Ramesseum video, you would have seen this hypothesis regarding power tool marks and if they were used to carve out hieroglyphs. Now, when we're talking about power tools, we are talking about something like what we know, like a router, a giant Dremel, something that spins at a high rate of speed that enables precise cutting. So, are we saying that the ancient Egyptians went down to the local hardware store and purchased a Black & Decker router? No. But the idea is that this ancient civilization times 2 that predates dynastic Pharaonic Egyptians did possess some type of ancient advanced machining and the tools that would have been used to cut and shape hard stone and build megalithic structures in a time frame most likely before the catastrophic event and flood about 11,500 years ago. Therefore, we don't see the use of these so-called power tool markings in the hieroglyphs because we believe that the hieroglyphs were done by the stone chisels, copper and bronze tools that the ancient Egyptians did possess. Here is the calcite chapel of Amenhotep I and what they call the bark shrine of Tutmosis IV and the white chapel of Senwosret I. And not too far away is this very interesting red quartzite red chapel of Hatshepsut. So we're going to take a look at that in a little bit. So these so-called shrines and chapels are very, very interesting. We believe that the dynastic Egyptians used them as chapels and shrines, but were originally made with other functions in mind, like sound resonance, healing chambers, and more importantly, activation of consciousness, and a few other ideas that would be for reasons that would be a part of life to this technically advanced civilization times 2. So sound resonance and consciousness activation and the activation of the pineal gland is the main theory of these being built, and 3 solid sides and a small opening and a ceiling. And that being said, with the combination of the stone that it is made out of, the resonance factor and the resonance capabilities is the only way that you can do that. And the only way to understand this resonance is to actually be inside of it when toning, which means when you can create by voice a frequency that can actually resonate the entire chamber to literally shake. Now we're in the inside of the white chapel of Senwosret I, and this structure is very, very interesting. It's obviously not a toning chamber of any sorts, but it's a beautiful structure and it's known for its notable inscriptions. And it was reused many, many times by the dynastic Pharaonic Egyptians. Now these stairs are very interesting because it appears to me that it was used for some type of slow procession leading into the chapel, maybe for rituals, as we know, and there were many rituals taking place throughout dynastic times. Now, this is totally out of place. I think this granite table or pedestal was no doubt brought into this chapel from somewhere else. It probably at one time was highly polished, cut perfectly, like it was done with advanced machining. And this chapel was used as a bark shrine chapel, which is a small boat. And a miniature model of the boat or the bark carrying the statue of the god Amun would rest temporarily on this pink granite table. And these rituals were carried out by the priests during festival ceremonies. So the dynastic Egyptians reused this most likely as this function, but it was most likely, again, existing as a functioning piece for a completely different reason. And if you take a look at the erosion on this, this definitely could have been the product of erosion from the resting place of the boat during the ritual practices. So it does make sense. But due to its age, it also can be erosion, or for what I immediately assumed when I saw this for the first time was maybe of human bodies or a human being that was laying on this table that needed to be treated or healed. And that was the vision that came to me immediately. And you will find that our acids in our body do wear away certain metals and stone. Or it could have been the use of alchemy that was always being done in ancient times, either by this ancient civilization times two, and possibly even passed down to the ancient Egyptians and to all ancient cultures. And alchemy, I mean, the use of metals and stones and the melting and the smelting and the whole process of using the natural resources of the earth. And I think this ancient civilization times two did use the earth's resources to the extreme in a way that cannot be comprehended. And the red quartzite chapel of Hatshepsut. They're calling this a bark chapel. It's another chapel that would have been used in dynastic times for ceremonies and rituals for this bark or boat with the statue of Amun that would come to rest. And the bark would rest on certain platforms like we saw in the other chapel. And here it would have been resting on the floor, which raises a lot of questions, which we're going to talk about. So some of the my ancient advanced civilizationist peers think this may have been a sound activation chamber or another type of resonance chamber, which I discussed before. And I agree as well, but the floor definitely has some explaining to do. Again, if it was used for the bark or the boat, now we have a situation where it's used on the floor. And we can see that there's gullies, there's water canals, there's a basin way in the back of that pic right there that we're going to see in a minute. The two raised platforms in the center. Just a smorgasbord of different things that are going on. So I believe this ancient civilization times two, or this pre-dynastic culture, however you want to think about it, had an ongoing effort to use the resources of the earth, which I just mentioned. The precious metals were one of the main life-giving elements to this culture. That in water and energy. And also the smelting and the melting of metals and the extraction of getting metal down to its purest form, I think was a very big part of life for this ancient civilization times two. So this floor reminds me of something that could be involved with melting and or smelting. And the process of alchemy incorporating with the refinement on metal refining places that we do find around the ancient cultures. So they definitely knew how to refine metal and get it into a liquid form. So that's what this kind of reminded me of, and no doubt it had liquid running through this floor system. And this area here is the Open Air Museum. This is near the chapels that we were just in. And this section has many remains. Pretty much everything in this temple, or from many parts of this temple, has rows and rows of stone dating to all periods. And some are perfectly cut and tooled. Some are more crudely cut and shaped. And over here is a vessel that would involve water or alchemy of some sort, that has a channel for liquid flow as well, like we just saw. And there's no doubt that's been going on in the ancient world and in dynastic times, of course. This doesn't necessarily go back to the ancient civilization times two, although I think the start of it was definitely there. So guys, I hope you enjoyed our brief walkthrough today at Karnak Temple. And we didn't even get to see every square inch of this place. It would take weeks. It's so big. And all I can say is that we need to examine these sites with an open mind and realize that our history has been clouded because of human greed and the rise of the patriarchal rule, for sure. And there's no way to put that. There is no other way. It was a travesty what happened to all cultures that ushered in the age of Aries and Pisces. It was a shift from the matriarchal to the patriarchal orientation in regard to the issue and power of daily life, for sure. And this is the time when the pharaohs were so egotistical and devastated the previous way of life, and cultures from then on continued to devastate places like this with the wars of religion. And this is why we don't have the true meaning of how life was in the very ancient world, for sure. And the god Amun, with his emergence with the sun god Ra, was ushered in the age of Aries. And his merge with Ra, Marduk, was the beginning of the patriarchal societies, not only in Egypt but in Mesopotamia with Marduk and other various cultures that I won't go into here. Different video. Alright, so the age of Aries brought in the loss of power and prestige of the feminine. This is why this happened. Human consciousness slowly degraded away from a time that was shared by this ancient civilization times two. And in that time is when the god Amun ruled Thebes before his union with Ra. And I also might add that it was the time he was depicted with his double-plumed headdress, which was in the time before he was merged with the sun god Ra. Hey guys, thanks for watching, and please subscribe so you can catch all these videos as they come out. Catch me on Facebook and Instagram, and I will talk to you guys soon.
Tapi jawab biwat Pastinya jemaahnya sendiri rajani fitra Nata nafiran Wanma kimau nana belugamis Halnaba jamstahu Nisu beduni ta'awah lubahda
توقيت المشعل هي النوم
Pastinya jemaahnya sendiri rajani fitra Nata nafiran Wanma kimau nana belugamis Halnaba jamstahu Nisu beduni ta'awah